Hey, Mike here, ZERMELOmusic.com, and in this video, we're going to go over 23 tech house tips in about 19 minutes. Really important, at the end of the video, leave a comment letting me know which tip was your favorite or which one you would like to learn more about. All right, so let's dive right in. Tip number one is when you're selecting drum sounds, it's way more about creating a vibe than it is about quality. So I like to choose drum sounds while listening to a reference. In this case, I was referencing Josh Butler, so I chose a bunch of kicks, a bunch of claps, a bunch of open hats, put them together on a drum rack, and I also got a bunch of loops into the session, and I just chose a combination that worked together, and this is what it sounds like. Now, of course, the obvious question here is how do I know if my drum sounds are working together? And the first most important answer to that is, are you at least close to the vibe that you're after? That's number one. Number two is tip number two, and that's make sure your drum layers are complementary. So for example, if you have one sound that's dark, look for a layer that's a little bit bright. If you have a sound that's a little bit more center channel, look for a wider complementary sound. Now, the best way for me to show you this is an example. So let's check out the clap. As you can see, there are three clap layers. The first one is a dry standard 909. Then we have a wide clap sound. So this one's down the center, this one's wide. Both of them are up front in the mix. So here we have another clap sound that is further back in the mix. So all together. Now, the next two tips have to do with manipulating sounds to get them to work with other sounds. It's best when you can pick sounds that are naturally complementary, but sometimes you have to process them to get them to work. So tip number three is use reverb to soften transients and push sounds back in the mix a little bit. So here we have a hat. If I turn off the reverb, it's dry, a little bit dry. There's a little bit of a reverb. If I turn this on, it gets pushed back. And the transient is softened a little bit for the more aggressive hats. Tip number four is similar. It's don't be afraid to gut a sound with EQ, for example, to get it to work. You can see right here, I'm just gutting this ride cymbal. So if we listen to it now, we turn all the processing off. See, the ride's supposed to just have this nice sheen in the mix, so I'm going to cut everything away that doesn't create that sheen to make room for the other sounds. Tip number five is use a drum motif. Now think of this as a hummable drum melody, something that's catchy. Let me play you an example here. That is a drum motif. In the track we're working on, this is it right here. So this sound right here. Now you can program the motif with a one shot like I did here in MIDI, or you can go through drum loops, find something catchy, bring that in and chop out everything that doesn't contribute to the catchy drum melody. And the idea is to have this running in the background to introduce some interest and some catchiness to the basic drum groove. Tip number six is odd looping. One of my favorites. It's a great way to introduce some subtle detail into your track. As you can see, this open hat loop right here is repeating every 3 beats, not 2, not 4. That way you're getting some subtle variation. So if I just repeated, for example, over a bar, then this hat is the exact same hat as this one. They're in the exact same space, and that's kind of boring. But now this hat is slightly different than this hat. You could even see it in the waveform. And doing this with different sounds over the course of your track with different loop lengths really adds up and creates a little nice subtlety. And so to set this up, all you have to do is just take a loop that you found and just loop it around 3 beats, for example, and there you go. And then you can just extend that out. Tip number 7 is at the drum bus level and is using parallel compression to create more articulation than fatness. Parallel compression is when you run a compressed signal in parallel to an uncompressed signal. So we'd get an audio effect rack, create a new chain. Now the signal is split and we just add a compressor to the second chain. Turn down the threshold, and that is parallel compression because we have a compressed signal running in parallel with an uncompressed signal. Most of the time with parallel compression, you're going to use a fast attack and you're going to use a pretty fast release. Now, this is going to squash down on the transients, making a really fat signal that you mix in parallel. And again, that's just going to bring up the fatness of the sound. But I recommend also trying a slow attack. That's going to let the transients through and push down on the sustained portions of the sound. So when you mix that in, you're you're going to get more articulate, punchier drums. Tip number 8 is use a simple bass sound. In tech house, underground house, you don't have to have a crazy bass sound typically. So in this case, all I'm using is a 3 harmonic bass. Now the kick is more of an 808 style. It's deeper, sitting at 50 hertz. So I dropped the first harmonic because this is going to be around 50 hertz. And I'm pushing the second harmonic because that's going to be an octave above the kick, around 100 hertz. And then I'm adding this guy in just for a little bit of flavor. And then the envelope here is just a little bit of a pluck. And if we're honest, that's not going to be doing very much because of the limiting stages down here. And just to wrap up the bass sound, we have a filter here with quite a bit of resonance. That's just bringing up this harmonic right here just a little bit. And last thing I'm doing is using one of these different filters to get this filter drive and bring the bass up to a more appropriate level. That's adding a little bit of harmonics. So we're doing a little bit of shaping here with EQ, but that is the entire bass sound. Let me play it without the sidechain. With the sidechain and the kick. Tip number 9 is using bass accents. And so just to add a little bit of flavor, a little bit of spice to the bass line, I've added some audio on top of the sub bass that just introduces harmonics. So here is one of the sounds. Check it out. Here is another sound. And here's the third sound. As long as you're filtering out the sub bass, it doesn't really matter. The thing that you have to be very, very aware of is making sure that nothing's getting in the way of the harmonics below 100 hertz. Those are the club harmonics. Those are the club lows, and you do not want to get in their way. Anything else, it's all right. So just to hear what they sound like. Tip number 10 is getting the bass level right with the kick. Now, I try to get my kick around -6 in the spectrum analyzer. I like to work at mastering level through the production and the mix. If you don't, then just double check your levels by getting your track up to mastering level. I like to get my kick around -6, and I like to get my bass within the window of -6 to -12. And I'm talking about the frequencies or harmonics that are below 100 hertz. Let's check out what's going on right now. Perfect. We're exactly where we need to be. The kick is around -6. It's a deeper style kick, so even if it's above -6, that's a bonus. The bass is perfectly within the window of -6 to -12, so I know that my low end is definitely going to translate in the club. Tip number 11 has to do with sourcing vocals. And most of the time I get my vocals from YouTube. But the process is always similar. I start with a theme. Let's say my reference track is You Little Beauty by Fisher. And the lyric is, you got me burning up. So I think, okay, passion. So maybe I go over to something like Splice. I type in passion, switch the BPM to 120 to 130, and I come across something like this. Passionate flow. Now, I don't like that at all, but I like the melody. Dun, 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 dun. And so that now gives me a bass melody, and it gives me a new theme. It's kind of creepy. So now I try to think, okay, well, let's look for a lyrical theme that's creepy. And that's the whole idea. Again, just going down the rabbit hole of ideas. When it comes to the track we've been looking at, it was the exact same process, and I stumbled across this interview with Carl Cox.
Doesn't matter. Okay. I'm in the zone, I'm in the flow of what I'm doing, and the night's happening, it's going along.
And here it is in the track.
I'm in the zone, I'm in the flow of what I'm doing, and the night's happening. The night's happening.
Tip number 12 is OTT on vocals. It just gives it an incredible presence. Let's check out the before and after.
The night's happening. The night's happening.
Just brings it way forward in the mix, super clear above all the instrumentation. We're going to drag OTT into the chain. Now with the vocal, we want to push the mid-range, especially from 1,000 to 5,000. We're going to crank the output of both the mid and top end, and then we just need to mix that in.
The night's happening. The night's happening.
Turn this off.
The night's happening.
Sounds like a muddy mess. Turn it on.
The night's happening.
Super clear over the other instruments. And of course, just adjust these to taste, but this is a great starting point. Tip number 13 is vocal variation, keeping things interesting. In the first drop here, I have the night is happening repeating over and over, and then kind of randomly, I've added another phrase in. Check it out.
The night's happening. What I'm doing. The night's happening.
kind of in a random spot, kind of a random phrase. Then in the second drop over here, there's even more variation. Halfway through the A section, I drop a vocal in. That doesn't happen in the first drop. And then I add even more vocals here in the B section of the second drop. Now, a bonus tip here is duplicating a track, cutting out a piece that I want, and then dumping a delay or a reverb onto it just to get an effects going. Now, this is better than doing a send, because a send you have to deal with automation, but here I could just move the audio around wherever I want, and it's much, much easier. And so you can see in the first drop here, I don't really have much going on, but I definitely do here in the second drop, so it's just another way to add variation. Check it out.
The night's happening, and it's
Tip number 14 is using the delay pitch up effect, and that sounds like this.
happening, it's going along. The flow of what I'm doing.
Super cool, super simple. Let's turn the delay rack off and recreate the effect. 100% wet. We'll do it all the way up feedback. I'm going to switch this to time. And then all we have to do is make sure on repitch mode here and turn the delay time down. Check it out.
Happening, it's going along. I'm in the zone, I'm in the...
Tip number 15 is process simple sounds. If you're coming up with sound design, start with something simple, then just do some cool processing. I've turned off all the processing on the synth, and I just have the synth now. Let's listen to it. It's very simple, just a square wave. I've reduced the first harmonic, 3/16 note rhythm with a little bit of swing, and we have a 1 semitone pitch bend going up and down. As soon as I turn on the effects rack here, all of a sudden it comes to life. Very cool. So with the dry channel, it is just basically saturation. I have a delay top layer, high feedback, short decay time, and we have a delay mid. Let's check that out. Just bouncing around real quick on 16th notes, and then I just have a reverb, filling it out, giving it some saturation and some overdrive here just to get some sparkle on top, and all together. Tip number 16 is to repurpose sounds. In this case, I've just duplicated my synth and I've changed the pitch bend amount. So if we come over here, you'll see the pitch bend amount is now 12, and I've turned this into a riser basically. If I double click and we change to the pitch bend, you'll see that it just goes up. So this rises up 1 octave through the first break. I also duplicated that and created a 24 semitone or 2 octave riser here for the main break. And you can see here in operator, we have a 24 semitone pitch bend. I also bounced the tails of these synths down to audio and came up with some reverses. That way I'm using sounds in my arrangement to create unique effects for the track, but also makes everything sound like it belongs together. Tip number 17 is using contrasting, complementary, or interacting leads. So that way your leads or hooks don't conflict and step all over each other. You can see here I have the motif, definitely a hook. You can see here I have a vocal, definitely a hook. But you can see they have their own space in the arrangement.
The night's happening.
Almost acting in a call response way. Now that was the first drop. In the second drop, I also included the synths, but you can see that the synths and the vocals are not stepping on each other. The vocals are basically filling the gaps between the synths. So they complement each other in the production because one gives the other space to shine, but they also complement each other in the mix. The vocal is dry and upfront. The synth is wide and wet. Tip number 18 is an arrangement tip, and it has to do with the 3 main things that you can do in a break. That would be introduce something new, go out into a new space, and just build tension in general. So in the template track, in the first break, I introduce the synth for the first time, so that's the new element. Also creating a new space by pushing the drums into a reverb. Here is the reverb return channel down here. I'm also sending the vocals into that reverb as well, and so I'm creating that new space, and that builds tension. I'm also building tension other ways by having this synth act as a riser, as we just looked at, going up in pitch, and I'm also having a couple white noise sweeps as well. But those are the 3 things: a new sound, a new space, or more tension. Tip number 19 is giving you some mixing benchmarks. We already looked at the kick and the bass. I like to park the kick around -6, around 50 hertz. It's okay if it goes above that quite a bit or just below it. The bass I like to park between -6 and -12 here in the spectrum analyzer for the harmonics below 100 hertz. Let's check out some other things as well. The clap is always going to be between 1K to 2K. Sometimes it can get up to 3K, but typically between 1 to 2K, you're going to be sitting right around here, average level around negative 34. Very typically. You can go up to 32, you can go down to like 40 even, but right around negative 34 is about average. And then finally up here in the open hat range, around 7K, we are going to typically be around negative 37. That's average. You can go higher up to negative 34. That is very loud. Or you can go down to like negative 42 if you want a more subtle, deeper style track. The point is to check your references, see what they're doing, then do something similar so you can achieve that sound. Tip number 20, if you are having trouble with reverbs, use a clap to trigger and audition reverb sounds. The reason is a clap is pure mid-range, and you want mid-range from the reverb anyway, because you don't want the lows. It's going to make the reverb muddy. You don't want the high because it makes the reverb sound artificial. So here we go. We're going to send the clap group to a reverb. We'll start with maybe a hall sound. Okay, maybe a room sound instead. I would use this as my primary reverb, adjusting where needed, but this would be my starting point because it defines a nice space in the mix. And of course, we would turn the send level down to taste. Something like that. Tip number 21 is use gates to tighten sounds. Oh my gosh, these things are amazing, but so underused. It's going to be subtle because this is on the bus level, but let me play you the before and after. This is before, then after. When it turns on, I get more groove out of it because the sound is tighter. It doesn't drag. And gates are a great solution to tightening sounds. You set the threshold, and any sound that drops below the threshold gets turned down. That's how it tightens the sounds. Tip number 22, the penultimate tip, and it is don't be afraid to limit. Limiting is not just reserved for mastering, it's also a great mixing tool. It's great for squashing sounds that don't need any transient detail, so you can open up more headroom in the mix. It's also amazing for making sounds more present in the mix in a transparent way. So I love doing this on bass. This is the example. What I always do is I drop in a limiter and I find the ceiling value of the sound. I'm going to turn these two limiters off and we'll find the ceiling value. You can see I'm just starting to get some gain reduction around -3, and then I just barely drive into that 0.5 dB or a dB, and I just start duplicating this until I get the presence. The idea is to get actually a bunch of limiters just doing a little bit that just inch the sound towards the front of the mix. In this case, I just used 2 limiters here, and that did the trick. Tip number 23, the last tip. This is the leveler trick, and it is my favorite mixing move. It is basically your perceived loudness knob, and the very simple idea is that we're going to drive into a ceiling. Kind of like the last tip we looked at, we're just going to be using saturation, and we're going to use the clap group as the example here. So let me show you how to set this up. The first thing I need to do is define a ceiling. So I'm going to reset the meter here, and I'm going to play the clap group and see what the ceiling value is, the peak value. So -2.93, about -3. So I'm going to grab a saturator, turn the soft clip on, set the output to the ceiling, so -3. Then I'm going to drive 3 decibels. So now the plugin is level matched. And so if I just drive into the ceiling, this plugin is not going to let the sound go above -3. That's why it's a ceiling, and I drive into that ceiling. At a certain point, the sound will distort, but in between, there's going to be a nice presence that I can add. So let's go ahead and drive this quite a bit just to show you what it can do. And right here, you'll see that the output's going to stay right around -3. Let's check this out. So way louder, but the output is just right around -3. Perfect. So all I need to do is just add a little bit of presence. Obviously that was too much, kind of ridiculous, but you get the point. This is just a perceived loudness knob. We'll just mix this to taste a little bit. That was it, 23 Tech House tips in 19 minutes. Again, leave a comment below the video letting me know what your favorite tip was and what you would like to learn more about. In tomorrow's email, I'm going to tell you more about the Underground House Bootcamp. Basically, it's 10 professional Ableton templates plus 20 hours of step-by-step instruction showing you exactly how to make professional quality Tech House tracks from scratch. The price of the bootcamp is going up at the end of the week from $197 to $297. So if this is something you're interested in, this is definitely the week to grab the bootcamp. You'll get all future updates at no extra cost. So look out for that email tomorrow. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to leave your comment below.